Hi, Chef Rosser back with you again. Welcome back to the Chef Share series. Today we're going to be talking all about knives. We're going to be looking at construction, we're going to be looking at materials, we're going to be looking at safe handling, and we're going to be looking at maintenance. And what that's going to entail is how we're going to keep these knives nice and sharp and in good working order. I've got Stephen Waltzer here with me, one of my great students, and we're going to go through this with you today because not all knives are the same. And depending on what your needs are, either in the professional kitchen or at home, we're going to hopefully help you pick out the best knife for your needs today. Hope you enjoy it. So the first thing we're going to talk about with knives is their construction. How are they put together and how does that affect the utility of the knife? So when we're looking at these knives, it's not just the blade and the handle. We're going to look at different construction on different knives, but traditional knife construction is about the front third of the or so of the blade is known as the tip. All right, the edge is typically about the middle third of the blade, and then the heel and the return are on the back end of the blade. Right, the spine is the back portion of the blade that is not sharp typically, and the point is the very tip. Right? So behind the blade, we have the return and the bolster lift. The return means it gives you a grip that you can work back and forth with, and the bolster tip is the widening of the handle where you get your grip from. Right? And on the handle itself, it can be made of wood or plastic or a composite, rubber. It doesn't really matter as long as it's easy to clean. This is wood and very traditional construction, and the handle on here is called scales. The metal running through the handle is known as the tang, and depending on what kind of knife you get, you can have a full or a partial tang. Usually if it's covered up and you can't see the metal tang throughout the entire handle, it has a partial tang in it. There's nothing wrong with that kind of construction. It just means that the metal doesn't go all the way through, and as you can see, this tang goes all the way through, and it's the shape of the handle is created so you can get a solid grip on it. It's got the rivets on there. We've got the guard on the end that keeps your fingers in place, and then the butt of the knife. So there's a lot that goes into the construction of knives, and it just depends on what style of knife you're getting, because if I put down this utility knife and I show you my other utility knife, this is a solid piece of stainless steel. However, on the handle, it's got some grip indentations on it to help ergonomically keep that in place. So that is the basic construction of the knife. Next thing we're going to talk about is the materials that these knives are made of. Now we've got a really wide array of knives here, and they are all steel. Now the metallurgy of how the steel is put together, with the exception of this, which is ceramic, the metallurgy of how the steel is constructed, it can get a little complicated, and you may have heard of high and low carbon steel. Now high carbon steel, this is about the best example I can show you of a high carbon steel, and this is a Damascus blade, which uses sandwiching of high carbon and low carbon steel to create a really nice workable blade. Now the difference between high carbon steel and low carbon steel is high carbon steel tends to oxidize or rust more. It will get pitting if it's left exposed to water or acid. Low carbon steel is like most other kitchen knives, very durable, stainless, will not erode or rust in the presence of moisture or acid. So when looking at this huge variety of knives that we have here, and none of these is particularly special, but when selecting knives, because they're not all the same, you need to figure out what is going to work for you. This ceramic knife, and this is a great example of a ceramic knife. These became popular a few years ago, and in my opinion, in the professional kitchen, these are garbage. They have no place in the professional kitchen. If I dropped this from table height, it would probably break. They're almost impossible to sharpen unless you're using a diamond. they're just not very durable or reliable. So I would not suggest that. I always suggest getting a nice stainless steel knife. You can get high carbon and pay a lot extra for it. You can pay, $500-600 for a knife, but it's going to do the same job as its $50 or $100 cousin, as long as you keep it in good working order. So when looking at the knives, we're going to look at how these materials are used, what is the utility of these knives, and how they all are different and similar from each other. Yes, they all have a cutting edge, but they're going to be used for different tasks within the kitchen. So in looking at this is just my 8-inch chef knife. These chef knives usually come in 8 or 10-inch, and you can even find them in a 12-inch version. And that is the length of the blade minus the handle. Now this is a Mercer 8-inch chef knife. I love this knife. It's easy to sharpen, keeps a good edge, very solid, good balance, good weight, nice grip, easy to clean. It's got all the characteristics that I need out of a knife in the kitchen, and it's probably $50 to $70 at the restaurant supply store. It's a great knife. And here's that Damascus we were talking about. This has got a little bit of pitting on it because of the high carbon nature of it, but this is a really fine blade. It keeps an edge very well. I just don't know that I would want to have this in the kitchen every single day, just because of the fact that it is susceptible to a little rusting or pitting, depending on what it is that I'm using it for. This chef knife here is a really kind of special example of a single-sided blade. Now one side is perfectly flat, and the other side has a very steep bevel on there, if you can see that. And so sharpening this is a little more difficult. This is more of a Japanese style carving or sushi knife. These can be really, really expensive. I've had this one for a long time. It's a great knife, but I found that I have very little purpose for it in everyday kitchen use. So we talked about the ceramic. Some people love them. I really don't care for them much because they're so difficult to sharpen, and if you drop them, there goes your money, right? So I'm gonna let Steven jump into the shot, and he's gonna talk about the utility of these blades.
Hi, so I'm going to go in about what all these knives are used for. So these smaller knives, they're called paring knives. They're mainly used for small knife work or things such as garnishing or peeling vegetables and fruits. These slender knives right here are called boning knives. There's a few types right here. This curved blade one is called the scimitar. And then these two, they look exactly the same. However, one is stiff and then one is flexible. So you use these mainly for fabricating protein. And then these right here are called utility knives. These are generally all-purpose knives for any kind of all-purpose task in the kitchen. And then you have your chef knife. These are primarily used for also all-purpose tasks, but mincing, chopping, used for meats and vegetables. And then these knives with the serrated blades are called sandwich knives or bread knives. This one is called an offset handle. It's a little easier to use on a cutting board. This will slice through bread without tearing it. And then this is called a carving knife. Use these to get uniform cuts of meat. There's two different types here. This one is called a gratin edge, and this scalloping right here, it allows air to get behind your cuts, so if you're cutting meat, it'll fall right off, it won't stick to the blade. And last but not least, you may have noticed that this paring knife right here has kind of a unique blade. It's called a Torno Blade. A Torno is a special kind of cut that you may see in more professional, fine dining kitchens. So you'd use this knife for Torno cuts or for fluting mushrooms or any kind of specialty garnish work.
The next thing I want to talk to you guys about is selecting a knife for your own personal use. Whether you're working in a restaurant or you're working at home, what is it that you want to look for out of a knife? What's the price point that you're comfortable with? How does it feel in your hand? So you've seen this whole variety of knives, and we have a real wide variety of handles and styles here. We have this composite handle, it's rubber and plastic. We have traditional wood handles here. And then we have like solid stainless, rubber. It goes on, and that's just the handles. And where really these knives get their utility is how they feel in your hand, the weight, the balance, also the price point, how much you're going to use that. So when selecting a knife, and we talked about this 8-inch chef knife that I have, I've found that I love this knife because of the balance, the grip, easy to clean, easy to keep sharp. And we're going to talk about sharpening in just a little bit, but what are you going to select? So really what you're going to look for is, how does it feel in your hand? Does it feel like you're going to be comfortable using that for hours and hours every day? Not all grips are the same. These plastic ergonomic grips may look great, but if you hold it in your hand and it doesn't feel quite right, it's not the right tool. You know, my favorite boning knife is this old-fashioned boning knife with this really slender handle, but someone else may not enjoy that. So one big recommendation that I always make to students is, don't buy your knives online, because you really need to get it in your hand and feel how it feels. See the weight, the balance, the structure of it in your hand while you're working on it. You know, ask someone if you can use their knife, if you like the style, and if it doesn't feel right, get something else. So price points are huge with these knives, and there's really some very wide discrepancies. This little cheap paring knife cost about $2. They usually give them away at restaurant supply stores. And then other knives, like if you're doing a Japanese specialty knife or Damascus, these can run up into the hundreds, if not more, depending on what you're buying. So price point's a big consideration as well. How often are you using them? What kind of tasks are you performing with those? So knife selection is a really big deal. The next thing we're going to talk about is sharpening. So now I'm going to show you how to use the Oil Stone to sharpen your knife. Now I selected my 8-inch chef knife because it's large and you guys can see it fairly well. However, we're going to use the same kind of motion and technique to sharpen all of our blades, with the exception of the Torno Blade, which is curved. It's a little more complicated, and obviously the bread knives. So this Oil Stone, it has 3 sides. It's got a fine side, a medium side, and a coarse side. Now this orangish side is the fine grit side. So this is going to do more of the fine sharpening and polishing of the blade. And we've got a food grade mineral oil in here. Now when we are sharpening, we need to make sure that we never use vegetable oil in this. It will ruin your stone immediately. We need to use a food grade mineral oil, and we need to get a little bit on the blade and some on the stone, just to create that lubrication that we need. When sharpening your blade, you want to use, depending on the style of blade and the angle of the cutting edge itself, you want to match that angle, and it's usually between 15 and 20 degrees. And the way I show my students how to do that is I tell them, if this is 90 degrees, half of that is a 45, and then a third of that is 15. So for this knife, because it's fairly thick, it's a larger blade, I want to use about a 20-degree angle. So if that is 90, 45, I'm going to go about half of that and a little less, and that is the angle I want to use. I want to make sure that I start at the heel and go from corner to corner on this stone to make sure that I get the entire length of the blade. And you will see oil beating up on the leading edge, and that tells me that I'm doing this properly. And a lot of this is muscle memory, and it comes from practice. So if you're not quite sure if you're doing it correctly, they sell little cheater guides that you can clip onto the back of your blade that help maintain that angle while the sharpening is happening, so that your angle isn't going up and down and you're not ruining the work of sharpening the knife by destroying the angle on that really fine edge. It's very hard to see. So a lot of this just comes from practice and muscle memory. and I like to do one stroke in each direction. You'll see other videos or demonstrations where they're dragging the knife backwards, right, like a strop, or they're doing 1, 2, 3 on one side and then doing the other side. I like doing it 1 and 1 just to make sure that I'm getting an even sharpening on that blade and not taking too much material or ruining the angle on either side. So this is a real simple back and forth motion. Then I'll wipe the blade off. I want to feel for burrs, and a burr is basically a little kind of a dragging sensation on the tip of your finger, because at a microscopic level, these knives, they look like combs, little fingers standing up, and when your knife gets dull, those little fingers fall to one side or the other. And what we're doing with the stone and sharpening this blade is we're standing all of those up, and we're reinforcing them by grinding off the leading edge and reinforcing that angle and just sharpening it up. Now when it comes to everyday maintenance, we're going to use what is known as a sharpening steel or a honing steel. And what this will do on that microscopic level is sometimes when your blade isn't quite dull, but it could use a better edge, when those little combs kind of lean over, this is just going to stand those up. Now if your blade is already dull and those little combs would be flattened off, you need to grind some material off and get those standing back up nicely. So keeping your blade in proper working order, the maintenance of sharpening that, this doesn't need to be done every day, right? But I always tell my students, every time you take your knives out of your bag, you should run them on the steel. And the way that I do that is, again, you're going to want to maintain that 20-degree angle on a knife like this. On a boning knife, you're going to want to do a 15-degree angle, a little flatter. And you'll see people sharpening their knives in this downward motion. I don't like that because it's not really comfortable with my wrist. And oftentimes the construction of the honing steels, they have a metal plate down here at the end, and you can just slam your knife blade into that. So what I will do is I will hold it in tight, and I will do a 3-2-1 pattern. So that's 3 times on one edge, 3 times on the opposite edge, then 2, and then once 3 times. Up, down, up, down, up, down. And you don't want to use too much pressure, but that's going to ensure that any little burrs you have on there come off and you keep your knife in good working order. So that is blade maintenance. Now, if your knife is really dull, you're probably not going to use this fine polishing stone, the orange one. You may need to use the medium or the coarse grit. Just be very careful when using those because they do grind off more material. You want to just start on those and then finish progressively lighter. But if your knife is in good working order, nice and sharp, you may just want to go on the fine grit just to give it a polish and reinforce that edge. All right? Now when it comes to keeping your blades nice and sharp and in proper working order, one of the things that we have to do is talk about how we're going to sharpen these blades. And up here I have a variety of materials that we're going to do just that with. So the first stone I have over here is a whetstone. And the whetstone is made up of 2 different grits of stone. It's a man-made product. And this has a very fine grit on one side and a coarse grit on the other side. The reason it's called a whetstone is because we're going to get it wet to use it. We're going to put it in water and we're going to let it hydrate for a few minutes. We're going to get it nice and wet, and then once it's probably about 10 minutes, I like leaving it in the water. Once it's nice and wet, we're going to put it on a dry towel or a damp towel so it doesn't slip. And keep your water pan handy. We're going to use that to keep the stone moist and then do that sharpening procedure on like that. These are great stones, all-purpose stones to use at home. I love having one of these at home to keep my knives in good working order. Oil stones can get cumbersome. Storage of them is a little bulky. You have to have the mineral oil, and so if you're going to use a sharpening stone at home, I always suggest getting a wet stone so that you can just dry it out, put it in a drawer, and get it out when needed. So that's your wet stone. The next one we're going to talk about is the oil stone. Now the oil stone is something that you're going to find in a professional kitchen, in most professional kitchens, if they're not using a sharpening service. And I have to caution you guys against sharpening services. A van will pull up to the restaurant. They'll say everybody wants their knife sharpened, and you hand them to a guy and he takes it out and he puts it on a belt sander. Don't let anyone else ever sharpen your knives for you. You should be able to, as a professional, sharpen your knives and keep them in good working order with the proper tools. All right. So moving on to back to the oil stone. This oil stone has 3 different sides with 3 different grits of stone. It uses a food grade mineral oil as a lubricant, and these are really great stones. They work super easy. They're fast, they're efficient, and if you can use one of these, they're great stones. I always suggest using these in a professional kitchen over a wet stone, because the maintenance required in keeping a wet stone in the water, in and out, in and out. In a professional kitchen, it doesn't make much sense when you can just get out the oil stone and do the job very quickly. The last stone that I'm going to show you guys is this diamond stone. Now these are really easy stones to keep around the house. This is hardened steel. It's got a ceramic base and then hardened steel with industrial diamond dust impregnated into it. These are great stones. These will get your knife sharp super fast. However, the downside of these is they grind off a lot of metal very quickly, depending on the pressure that you're using. So these will get your knife super sharp really quickly, but if you use it improperly, you can damage the geometry of your blade. So use these very carefully. If you don't know how to use one, I wouldn't suggest starting how to learn learn to use a sharpening stone with a diamond stone. These can be a little tricky. Now for daily maintenance, we're going to use what's known as a sharpening steel or a honing rod. Now these two are different constructions, obviously. Now this is the traditional sharpening steel, and it's a grooved hardened steel. And this is great for daily maintenance. I tell my students every time you take your knife out of the bag, you want to use this. Just give your knife a new clean edge. This other one, these have become really popular in the last few years. This is a diamond steel, and this is much like this diamond stone because it's that same hardened steel with the industrial diamond dust impregnated in it, and these will also remove metal from your knife. And the way you can check on that is if you run your thumb on there, that's all metal dust that comes off of there. So this can damage the geometry of your knife as well. However, in a pinch in the professional kitchen, if I need to put a quick edge on my knife, I'm going to reach for this before I reach for that, because this is going to get it super sharp really quick and I can get back to work. Now for daily maintenance, I'm going to use the traditional honing steel. But if I need to put an edge on it really quick, I'm going to grab for this. There's no substitute for that. It'll keep me from having to go to the stone and go through all of the process of sharpening. So that is sharpening and maintenance. Next, we're going to talk about how to wash and handle your knives safely.
So I'm going to go over how to safely hold your knife throughout the kitchen. So first things first, never hold your knife like this. You want to do what's called a pinch grip, where you pinch the bottom of the blade like this. When you hold it like this, the knife's a lot less stable, and it's actually a little bit dangerous to hold it like this. So always try to get a pinch grip. And then whenever you're handing a knife off to someone, you want to hand it to them by the hilt with the blade pointed to you. It's obviously a little dangerous if you do it like that. And then while walking throughout the kitchen, you want to hold it to your side, pressed against your leg. And then you could also say knife or sharp, just so everyone knows that you have a sharp object in your hand. And a few rules to adhere by when washing your knives is, first things first, never leave your knife unattended at the dishwashing station, either on the dish deck or in the dish sink. especially not in the sink because the water most of the time is not clear. So if you dip your hand in there, these blades are super sharp. You'll get a really horrible cut. And so when you wash it, you just want to do a quick rinse, maybe a wipe down, and then immediately take it back. And with that said, just don't let anyone else wash your knives or sharpen your knives. They are a dangerous tool, so you want to be responsible for them in any way possible.